In 1963, a package arrived at the office of a Moscow literary journal called Novy Mir. It contained 847 handwritten pages. The pages were stained with what appeared to be rust, or ink made from crushed brick and melted snow. The handwriting was microscopic, cramped, as if the writer was trying to fit a universe onto every scrap of available space. The package had no return address. The note attached said only this: "My name is Dr. Aleksei Voronov. I was a senior physicist at Research Station 7, Krasnoyarsk. I have been held without charge in Facility 14 since November 1952. I do not know if I am still alive by the time you read this. But I know what I found. And I know why they put me here. And I believe someone must know." The journal's editor read 3 pages and immediately locked the manuscript in his personal safe. He knew if anyone discovered he had it, he would disappear too. He kept it hidden for 26 years. Until the Soviet Union began to crack. Until a researcher named Irina Sokolova found it in 1989 and understood what she was holding. This is the story of Dr. Aleksei Voronov. What he discovered. What they did to him. And what he wrote from inside the silence they forced on him for 11 years. Dr. Aleksei Voronov was born in Leningrad in 1918. His father was a mathematics professor. His mother was a botanist. He was raised in an apartment full of books and scientific journals, where dinner conversations were about quantum mechanics and the nature of light. He graduated from Leningrad State University in 1940 with the highest marks in his class. He was 22 years old and considered one of the most promising young physicists in the Soviet Union. When the Second World War consumed everything, Aleksei was assigned to a scientific division rather than combat. The Soviet military understood that certain minds were more valuable in laboratories than on battlefields. By 1945, he was working on classified atmospheric research, studying how radiation interacted with permafrost soil in Siberian conditions. In 1948, he was transferred to Research Station 7, located 60 kilometers outside Krasnoyarsk in central Siberia. The station was so classified that it didn't appear on any Soviet map. Aleksei was told it was an atmospheric physics facility. A place to study solar radiation effects on the Siberian magnetosphere. He believed them. He was 29 years old and brilliant and idealistic, and he believed that Soviet science was the future of human civilization. He spent 4 years at Research Station 7. He lived in a dormitory with 17 other scientists. They had access to a modest library, a canteen that served decent food by Soviet standards, and a recreation room with a chess board and a broken piano. Aleksei loved the chess. He played every evening with a geologist named Pyotr Vasilyev, who became his closest friend. He wrote long letters to his mother in Leningrad. He read voraciously. He worked 17-hour days on research that he genuinely believed was advancing human knowledge. And then, in September 1952, he went into Laboratory Block C to retrieve equipment for a calibration test. He wasn't supposed to be in Laboratory Block C. His clearance didn't cover it. But the door had been left unlocked. And curiosity, the defining quality of every great scientist, is also sometimes the most dangerous. What Aleksei found in Laboratory Block C took him 3 visits to fully understand. The first visit lasted 4 minutes. He retrieved the equipment he needed, noticed something unusual on the workbenches, and left before anyone saw him. But he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. The second visit lasted 12 minutes. He examined the materials on the workbenches more carefully. His training as a physicist allowed him to understand what the equipment was measuring. And what it was measuring was impossible. Or at least, it should have been classified as a natural anomaly. An unexplained phenomenon requiring further study. Instead, it was clearly being deliberately suppressed. By the third visit, Aleksei understood everything. Research Station 7 was not an atmospheric physics facility. It was a monitoring station. The Soviet government had discovered something beneath the Siberian permafrost. A source of energy. Not radioactive, not thermal, but something the existing science of 1952 had no adequate category for. The readings in Laboratory Block C showed a consistent, measurable field emanating from a depth of approximately 800 meters. The field affected electromagnetic measurements in ways that current physics couldn't explain. Someone at Research Station 7 had been studying it for years. But the suppressed report stacked on those workbenches told a different story. The official findings sent to Moscow described normal atmospheric measurements. Nothing unusual. Standard data. But the actual data, sitting right there on the workbench, was extraordinary. Someone was lying to Moscow. Or Moscow was lying to itself. Or, most terrifying of all, Moscow knew exactly what was there and had decided it was too significant to allow into the scientific record. Aleksei wrote everything he observed into a private notebook. He used a code he developed himself, a combination of mathematical notation and botanical symbols borrowed from his mother's old research journals. He was meticulous. He recorded dates, measurements, equipment serial numbers. Everything that would allow another physicist to verify his observations independently. Then he made the decision that ended his freedom. He wrote a formal report. Addressed it to the Soviet Academy of Sciences in Moscow. Marked it urgent. And submitted it through the internal mail system of Research Station 7. The report never reached Moscow. Or if it did, it never reached the Academy of Sciences. Within 72 hours of submitting it, Aleksei Voronov's life at Research Station 7 ended. Two men arrived at his dormitory room at 4 a.m. on November 14, 1952. They wore civilian clothes. They showed no identification. They told Aleksei to pack personal items only. No research materials. No notebooks. He was given 10 minutes. Pyotr Vasilyev, his chess partner, heard the commotion and appeared in the corridor. He asked what was happening. One of the men told him to return to his room. It was the last time Aleksei and Pyotr ever saw each other. Aleksei was transported by car to a small airfield. Then by plane to a location he couldn't identify. Then by a second car, blindfolded, to Facility 14. He described his arrival in his diary later. He wrote that Facility 14 smelled of cabbage soup and old stone. That the hallways were narrow. That the window in his room was small and high on the wall and showed only a rectangle of gray sky. He was told he'd been admitted for psychiatric treatment. That his recent behavior had shown signs of paranoid delusion. That reporting imaginary findings to official bodies was a symptom of a condition requiring extended care. He was not a prisoner, they said. He was a patient. He had not been arrested. He was being helped. In the Soviet system of that era, psychiatric institutionalization was a common method of silencing dissidents, scientists, and intellectuals who became inconvenient. It was called psikhushka. The diagnosed condition was often called sluggish schizophrenia. A condition invented specifically to justify the imprisonment of people who questioned authority. Its primary symptom, according to Soviet psychiatry, was the belief that the state was persecuting you. Which meant that the more accurately you understood your situation, the more mentally ill you were officially considered. Aleksei understood this immediately. He wrote it in his diary on his first night in Facility 14. He wrote, "They have created a perfect trap. The truth is my symptom. The clearer I see, the sicker I am." Aleksei had no paper when he arrived at Facility 14. He had no pen. He had nothing. But he had his mind. And his mind refused to stop working. He spent the first 3 months at Facility 14 memorizing everything. Every observation from Laboratory Block C. Every measurement. Every detail of his disappearance. He recited them in order every morning and every night, like prayers. Making sure nothing faded. Then, gradually, he started acquiring materials. A sympathetic orderly named Gennady left a pencil in the dayroom one afternoon. Aleksei kept it. He tore margins from the official medical documents left in his room. He wrote in spaces so small that a magnifying glass was needed to read them. When he ran out of margins, he found other surfaces. The backs of food labels. The inside covers of the 2 permitted books in his room. He dissolved rust from a window bolt in water to make brown ink. He sharpened a splinter of wood into a fine point. And he wrote. Every day. Without exception. Not just about what he'd seen at Research Station 7. He wrote about everything. About his mother and the botanical sketches she used to bring home from fieldwork. About the chess games with Pyotr Vasilyev and the specific positions they'd left unfinished. About a girl he'd almost asked to dance at a university party in 1939 but hadn't, because he was afraid. He wrote about scientific ideas that came to him in the night. Theories he developed alone in his room with no equipment and no colleagues and no library. Some of them, according to physicists who later read the diary, were remarkably close to concepts that wouldn't enter mainstream science for another 20 years. And he wrote about the other patients. He observed them with a scientist's precision. He described a former army general who'd been institutionalized for questioning a military decision. An artist who'd painted something that offended a local party official. A teacher who'd told her students that a historical account in their textbook was inaccurate. They were all, in the logic of Soviet psychiatry, mentally ill. They all believed the state had wronged them. Their accurate perception of reality was their diagnosis. Aleksei wrote, "This room contains more sanity than the offices of every man who put us here." By 1958, 6 years into his confinement, Aleksei had accumulated what he estimated was over 400 pages of writing. Hidden in extraordinary places. Inside the hollow leg of his bed frame. Behind a loose stone in the wall near the floor. Sewn into the lining of his permitted coat. He'd become adept at hiding things. At making himself seem less remarkable to the guards. At timing his writing to periods when surveillance was lightest. In 1959, Gennady, the orderly who had once left a pencil on the table, was transferred out of Facility 14. Before he left, he came to Aleksei's room for the last time. He said nothing. He simply looked at Aleksei for a long moment, then looked at the coat hanging on the wall. And left. It was 3 months before Aleksei realized that Gennady had looked at the coat because he knew about the pages sewn into the lining. He'd known for years. And he'd said nothing. Aleksei wept when he understood. He wrote about it that night. He wrote, "There are people who do not speak the truth loudly. But they protect it quietly. Gennady is more courageous than any man who shouts." In 1961, a new patient arrived at Facility 14. A young man named Dmitry Chesnov, barely 20 years old, who'd been institutionalized for writing poetry that questioned Soviet progress. Aleksei was cautious. New patients could be informants. But over months of observation, he concluded Dmitry was genuine. Dmitry was also scheduled for a medical transfer in 1963. A transfer that would take him through Moscow. Aleksei spent 4 months preparing. He condensed his most important pages. He copied them onto the lightest available paper in his smallest handwriting. He organized them. Numbered them. And the night before Dmitry's transfer, he explained everything. What he'd found. Where he'd hidden the pages. What to do with them. Aleksei told Dmitry to send the pages to Novy Mir Journal in Moscow. Not to the Academy of Sciences. Not to any government body. To a literary journal. Because literary journals were watched less carefully than scientific institutions. And because sometimes literature survives when science is suppressed. Dmitry Chesnov was 22 years old when he left Facility 14 with 847 pages of Aleksei Voronov's diary hidden in the false bottom of a medical transfer case. He was terrified every kilometer of the journey. He delivered the package successfully. And then he disappeared from the historical record. No one knows what became of Dmitry Chesnov after 1963. Irina Sokolova was 31 years old when she found the manuscript in 1989. She was a junior researcher at the Soviet Academy of Sciences, working on a project to document suppressed scientific research from the Stalin era. She'd been going through boxes of materials from the estate of a deceased journal editor when she found a locked metal case inside a false-backed cabinet. Inside the case was a manuscript wrapped in oilcloth. When she began reading it, she realized within the first hour that what she was holding was one of the most significant historical documents of the Soviet scientific era. She also realized it was potentially still dangerous. The Soviet Union was weakening in 1989. Glasnost was opening cracks in the system. But the institutions that had imprisoned Aleksei Voronov still existed. The people who had authorized his confinement might still be alive. Irina spent 3 years quietly verifying what she could. She located records confirming that a Dr. Aleksei Voronov had been employed at Research Station 7, Krasnoyarsk, until November 1952. She found a single medical transfer document placing him at a classified psychiatric facility designated only as Facility 14. She could not find any record of his release. Or his death. He had simply stopped appearing in any document after 1963. The same year the diary arrived at Novi Mir. In 1992, Irina Sokolova published a partial transcript of the diary in a Russian scientific history journal. The article was titled, "The Voronov Papers, Scientific Suppression and Psychiatric Imprisonment in Soviet Physics, 1952 to 1963." The response from the scientific community was immediate. Physicists who reviewed the technical content of the diary confirmed that the anomalous measurements Aleksei had described in Laboratory Block C were consistent with a phenomenon that had been quietly studied in Western science since the 1970s under different terminology. What Aleksei Voronov had found in that Siberian laboratory in 1952 was real. And someone had decided it was too significant for him to be allowed to speak about. Today, a memorial plaque exists in the physics faculty of what is now St. Petersburg State University. It reads simply, Dr. Aleksei Voronov, 1918 to 1963. Physicist. Witness. He wrote so others would know. Below the plaque, someone has placed a pencil. Every time it is removed, a new one appears. Nobody knows who leaves it there. Nobody knows if it has anything to do with Gennady, the orderly who once placed a pencil on a table and looked away. But the pencil keeps returning. And in some ways, that small, quiet persistence is the most faithful monument to everything Aleksei Voronov stood for. He didn't shout. He didn't fight. He simply refused to stop writing. And because he refused to stop writing, we know he existed. We know what he saw. We know what they did to him. And we know that in his final recorded diary entry, written sometime in early 1963, shortly before the pages were smuggled out, Dr. Aleksei Voronov wrote, "If you are reading this, then something I made survived. That is enough. That has always been enough."